The most amazing thing for me really is that whilst all the students during the course, and there were hundreds over the time and many dozens of people who graduated from the full course, whilst they were learning about psychosynthesis, I was learning about how we can really understand more deeply how psychosynthesis works for people. They would be giving me feedback on every lesson and I would be giving them feedback. And for me, the learning in this was tremendous. So as the years went on, the courses, the lessons in the courses were constantly changing. I was updating them, finding out what worked well, what didn't work so well. So I was quite able to bring this down to 10 basic lessons, starting off with looking at the journey of life, and then going through some of the basic principles of personal psychosynthesis. In fact, the first 5 lessons really are personal psychosynthesis, which then lead you on to the key of psychosynthesis really, which is self-identification. And then the remaining 5 lessons look at the active will and the use of imagination, purpose, all those things, and coming in the end to look at global issues and how we can take on the mantle of leadership through psychosynthesis. Not leadership where you tell other people what to do, but leadership where you can coach people, you can mentor people, you can help people find out what they're wanting in their life and how they can go about getting it. That's where the subtitle of Lessons in Self-Awareness and Making Your Best Choices comes from. So what did I learn from all the students and my interaction with them? I learned that, firstly, the most important starting place is analysis. It's an occult and esoteric truth that analysis always needs to precede synthesis. And Asar Jolie says this very explicitly in the manual, that the first step of psychosynthesis is analysis. Now, it's quite hard to see how you're going to do a meaningful analysis, particularly through a distance course or through a book. But the obvious way, which of course people have already cottoned onto, not only in psychosynthesis but in other self-development modalities, which is an autobiography, and that is part of the first lesson in the course. I don't start to introduce anything about the models of psychosynthesis, the psychosynthesis egg diagram, for instance, until lesson 2, where we go on to looking at awareness and understanding our inner world and looking at maps that might help us find our way around and know who we are and what we're up to, as it were. But first of all, we get a sense of where we've come from. And I'm using a model in that beginning of the book, which I call cycles within cycles. There are cycles of our childhood development. We're born, we start off as a baby, we become a toddler, an infant, teenager, etc. And that model is presented, and the student is asked, the reader of the book now, is asked to consider these stages of their life, and then to reflect on how all the previous cycles of life that you've been through repeat themselves. So, I mean, there are classic examples, you know, the child who doesn't get the right reflection back from its mother then finds it difficult to make relationships perhaps when they're a teenager and become depressed in their 30s. I'm making that up, but you understand what I'm talking about, this thing, how things repeat themselves. And what we're looking at here is not to say there's anything wrong with that. All those things help us to be who we are right now. The important thing is to be able to, by analysing and knowing what we've been through, we don't have to keep repeating the same patterns, the same cycles over and over again. Or if they do come up, at least we have an awareness of what they're about. So after that, and after looking at the models of awareness and stuff, the obvious next step comes along in lesson 3 of the course, is looking at subpersonalities. Subpersonality work's fantastic, isn't it? Not surprisingly, there are other methods who have taken on subpersonality work, often without really acknowledging where it comes from. Books written about subpersonalities even that hardly mention psychosynthesis, which on one level I find a little bit like, it's annoying, but on another level I think, well, it's important that this work is spread, and as long as it's being spread around, that's good. So by exploring all the different roles we take in life, we start to understand how we've created ourselves or been created in a certain way. I have a personality I have because of all those previous cycles of my life, but also because of how they repeat unconsciously. So to start getting awareness of them is so vital, particularly because then we lead right at the end of the subpersonality work section of the book to start asking the question, well, who is aware of having these subpersonalities? Well, of course, that leads us then to the very central essence of psychosynthesis, which is self-identification. You learn to disidentify from, to separate from those roles. You become that part of you that's aware you have roles. And in psychosynthesis, we call that the I or the self. It's not the ego I, who's kind of like one of or a group of subpersonalities, but a self who's like, well, the classic analogy is not one of the players in the orchestra, but the conductor of the orchestra. So the subpersonalities all play their instruments very well, perhaps, but unless the conductor is there to direct what's happening, they're not going to make music together. Which of course then leads on to what the next part of the book looks at, which is the act of will, or the process of willing. It's very important, I think, to be able to move to that very quickly, because that's where we start getting a sense of the extra importance of self-identification. What's the point in me being aware that I have these parts if I don't have the energy, the connection, the will to be able to do something about it? One of the factors that is very important in being able to do that, of course, is to be able to use our imagination, our ability to create in a meaningful, life-enhancing way. I'm making it far too black and white, but instead of being frightened of what's ahead, we can, through using the will and our imagination, be excited about what's ahead, aware of what we're moving into, what choices we're making in our lives. So after learning to self-identify, learning to be able to use the will and the imagination in a more effective way, basically, we have to look at, we've got to lesson 9 in the course, which is called the realms of spirit and shadow. Because of course the more light we shine on things, the more shadow is cast as well. So it's very important to be able to see that, well, in a classic psychosynthesis way of saying it, the self is not just in the heights, the self is also in the depths. There's a wonderful psychosynthesis meditation, visualization, which I'm sure most of you know, where you imagine yourself going to the top of a very high, wonderful, ethereal mountain where you meet a wise old being who gives you information about your life and how you can be helped through this contact. The better meditation, which we use in the book and is used, I think, quite widely now in psychosynthesis, is you don't stop there. You then carry on with the imagination and you go from the height of the mountain down into a dark, foreboding, frightening valley. This can be quite a task for people, but the point is that when you get down into the very depths of the valley, there's the wise old being again, waiting for you. That the self isn't, to speak in psychosynthesis terms and the egg diagram model, the self isn't just at the top of the egg. The self isn't just the little me in my heart that's part of the self. The self is the whole egg, and the self is down in the depths as much as it's in the heights. I think this is such an important part of psychosynthesis work, because once you start getting that, life changes. It becomes more, there's a greater synthesis of all the stuff that's happening in your life, because you know there's purpose in it. There's purpose not in the so-called good stuff, but also purpose in the so-called not so good stuff. And then we come to lesson 10, which really brings it all together. It's called acceptance and change. And the real nub of the last lesson is learning to how can we put all this stuff that we're doing for ourselves into a global arena? How can we find a way of sharing what we know, not necessarily through teaching or expounding it like I'm tempting to do now, but through our actions, through how we are in life. And we look also in that chapter at leadership, not leadership which is about telling other people what to do or having power over them, but true leadership which is about sharing power and helping people to be empowered themselves. That's psychosynthesis, and that's what this book is about.